are assembled. So I would like to start by doing something that I call containing a story, which means for us all to have the same understanding of why we're here, what we're going to do, and who else is in the room. Because in this case, the room is actually bigger than the people that we can see here. There is a camera here, hello. And there is a camera here, hello. Thank you for waving to them and welcoming them here. They are coming from around the world. And some of the people coming from around the world are coming because they're familiar with the stories that I tell over at Sparkle Stories. So, the people that are in the room, if you're familiar with Sparkle Stories and have listened to, say, more than one Sparkle Story, could you raise your hand? All right. So you can look around and see that about half of us are familiar. And if you are familiar with this church, and especially that guy right there, could you raise your hand? Great. Okay. This is a very special space. This is a very special night. And this is a very special time of the year. If you're in the northern hemisphere, the relationship to light is such that it's getting darker earlier and it's staying darker longer. So we have this relationship to light that is magical and kind of precious. But some of the people here, hello again, are coming from a place in the world where the opposite is happening. And they are getting more light. It's getting lighter earlier and staying light longer. So we have a gift as a full community to feel the abundance of light and also the preciousness of light. And that's what we're going to be doing together with two stories. One that some of you might be familiar with called The Cooper and the White Winter Oak. And then the second one we're going to create together. And I know we have some storytellers in the room that may be helping me. We have some storytellers that are there that may be helping us. And we also have a room full of stories that are already speaking to us, all surrounded. And maybe to introduce this space, this church, and the stories that are surround us is properly goes over to Will. Hello, Will.
Hello, you all. Hello. Lovely to have you here with us in Ripley Chapel of First Congregational Church. And just want to say Winchester, as many of you know, has just had an open studio event over the weekend. And we have artists up on the third floor of the church, two of whom are presented here. Jenny Olson and Tracy Vartanigian-Burhans. One of the artists is in our midst as well. So we want to welcome you, and we're so glad to welcome another artiste among us, who is David. Good to have you, David.
I should say we have some history. That this event is being brought by 3 different groups. My group is more the teaching people how to tell stories. I teach children as well as adults how to do that, how to do what I do, restorative storytelling. And we have a graduate over here that is an expert storyteller that we might be hearing from. And then Sparkle Stories, that's familiar to at least half of you. And we can say hello to Lisbeth, who right now is in Texas, and she will be sending love and storytelling warmth. By the way, she's the one that says, "This has been," at the end of all the stories, and gives the copyright and says, "We hope you enjoyed it." So at the end of the story, maybe some of you will go along with Lisbeth and say, "We hope you enjoyed it." That's an inside joke to the Sparkle Stories people. It's important to them. And then Will, who is the minister here at the church, we all were in the same building in Charlotte, Vermont. And that's how I know Will. And Elizabeth and I attended that church, and that's where Sparkle Stories began. I told a story in the church. It was a superhero story, I Am Marvel. And that was when Sparkle Stories began. And now here we are again. So I think we'll tell a story now. And as tonight is about light, and for me, light is very much connected to talking about superheroes. Probably the most powerful superpower there is, which is gratitude. When you feel gratitude, you can do just about anything, I have found. And this story has light and gratitude in it. And we'll revisit light and gratitude after this story as we create the second story together. A long time ago, there was once a cooper, which is a barrel maker, who lived in a small building outside of town. This was a long time ago. This small studio and home was up on a hill. It overlooked the town. And not too far away from the hut was the edge of what remained of an old forest. And I should say, I am very comfortable with coughing. So, in this little hut that overlooked the town that was toward the edge of the forest, the cooper, the barrel maker, had his bed. He had his workshop, which was actually most of the space, a wall full of tools, and the wood that he used for his barrel making. Back then, most things really were stored in barrels, so it was actually a very important job. It was a very important position to have in a community, because if you think about all the different things that we have in our life back then, most of them were stored in barrels, nails, food items, drink. Anything that you would drink would be stored in a barrel. And so the cooper had the responsibility of knowing what size barrel to make it so that nothing could leak, and in some cases, choosing the right wood. Because if whatever was inside had a particular taste, you wanted to make sure that the wood complemented that. And in some cases, like for different beverages, the person making the beverage, like wine, would want a particular wood for a particular taste. And the cooper was the master of knowing how to build such a barrel. And just so you know, there are pieces of wood that are called the staves that are along the outside. There's the headboard and the baseboard, and then there are metal rings that keep it nice and tight. And the cooper did all of this. He had a forge, a workbench, all the tools, the bed. This cooper was well known in town and known in many other towns around because his work was so specialized and he was so good at what he did. So he was always busy. He was also a man of integrity, and what that means is that he did what he said he would do always. So he had that reputation. So order after order would come in, and he would measure out the amount of time it would take to create those barrels, and he was always on time. Sometimes he needed a particular wood, like for a winemaker that wasn't in this town but a neighboring town. And this winemaker had a wine that needed a particular flavor of oak and chose, quite specifically, the white winter oak. It was once upon a time a popular tree, but at this point it was actually hard to find that tree. Well, luckily, the cooper had a relationship with woodcutters in the area. He used to, when he was a young man, go out and harvest a tree that he needed for a particular set of barrels and bring them all back. But he was an old man now, and he needed to use his energy and his expertise on the barrel making, and he would work with woodcutters that would go off and find the trees. Well, one of them found a white winter oak, a big one, and with smaller ones around it. So the woodcutter cut down the tree, made room for the young ones, and then sold the wood to the cooper, who then cut it into certain lengths, halved the logs, quartered the logs, eighths the logs, cut those into staves, and piled them in such a way that they could dry properly for this order of barrels. There were quite a number of them that needed to be made. So our story begins at the end of autumn, right about now, actually, this time of year, here in the Northern Hemisphere. And got to work and began to shape the staves, to carve out the headboards, to forge the metal rings that would go around and would progressively build barrel after barrel. And it got colder. So that wasn't the only wood he had. He had firewood as well, and had various hardwoods and then softwoods to keep the forge running and to keep his little house warm. That supply began to dwindle. So one day he realized he needed to get more firewood in order to keep going through the winter, because this job was going to be due right before the winter solstice, which in this part of the world is the longest night, and it was quite cold that time of year. When he saw that the wood pile was beginning to dwindle, he knew he needed to go into town to get an order of firewood, but he had been working so hard he didn't notice that it had been snowing quite a bit. And when he went to the door, pushed open the door to see that the snow was actually now knee-deep. It had been snowing for some time, quite heavily. He would not be able to go into town. So he returned and realized he needed to be more careful about how much of the firewood he used. So he parsed it out, he made a plan, and if all things went well, it didn't get too much colder, he would be able to get, at least for a few more weeks, until he would absolutely need to get more wood. Well, he got back to work and made more barrels, and it got colder. So he used the minimum amount of wood. It went through the pine, went through much of the beech wood, and the hardwood was long gone. And so he would heat up the house, the workshop, work until his fingers were just too cold, and then he would get into his bed and cover himself with quilts and warm himself through the night. And then it actually got a little dangerous for him, and he needed to make a decision. How would he finish the work? Because he did have wood to burn. There was the white winter oak, there was plenty, but there was no way in which he was going to burn that precious wood when he had an order to fulfill. So it was a dilemma. He didn't know quite what to do. The good news is that he was not alone. I mean, he was alone inside the building, but he had a particular individual that had always been with him. And this was a nature being, an elf. It was a wood elf, because that hut had a single tree right next to it, a big tree that had been planted a long time ago when his grandfather actually planted it. Big tree that had grown around the hut. And nature beings are associated with anything that lives. In fact, even rocks and stones and crystals have little gnomes, little elves, fairies that tend to those plants and rocks and even animals. And they are interested in people as well. But they're everywhere. And this particular one had watched the cooper grow. Had been there the whole time that the tree is there. The tree that his grandfather had planted specifically to use one day for barrels because his grandfather was a barrel maker as well. And this tree was very special. It was a white winter oak. And it was huge. It was perfect actually for making barrels, but that tree was the cooper's best friend. That tree had been with him. He'd climbed in it. There was a swing associated with it. He would lie underneath it and dream. His mother would do the same. His father would do the same. That tree had been with him his whole life. There was no way in which he would use that tree's wood for barrels. And the elf, the white winter oak elf, knew this and felt gratitude to the cooper for this and wanted to help. So here is what the elf did. She climbed to the top of the tree and whispered a message into the wind. And the wind fairies took that message and sent it straight into the forest. And it swirled around the forest looking for a particular individual until it found him. In the forest was a man. This man was a gentle woodsman, well known in that area, because some people thought this woodsman was actually part elf. In a way, they weren't wrong. He was fully a person, but he could listen to the natural world. He knew all the fairy life that was there. He couldn't see the fairies, but he could hear them, and he would respond to them. He would never cut down a tree unless he spoke to the being that cared for that tree and asked its permission. So that whispered message that came from the white winter oak elf came to him right at a time in which he needed to hear that message. The snow was coming down, it was cold, it was late, and he needed to find a place to sleep. The message was, "Come to the house." And it directed him. So he took his sled, which was filled with wood that he had been cutting, filled with hickory and oak and maple, and he brought it through the snow. It took some time. It took a long time. But eventually he made it to the edge of the hut and knocked on the door. Now the cooper had been lying in bed underneath the quilts. It was cold inside. And he got out of bed and made his way over to the front door and was able to get the door open enough to see that there was a man outside, a cold man, who had clearly almost frozen from all the snow that was coming down and the temperatures, and he quickly invited him in. And though the fire had gone out, the cooper used his last few logs of firewood to start a new fire. He stoked the fire. It warmed up the space. He heated up the rest of his stew and gave it to the gentle woodsman. And they talked. And these two men had spent much of their time alone, so they had much to talk about. But eventually the fire started to go down, and the only wood left was the white winter oak. So the cooper stood up and went to go get some of the staves. He would never use this to warm himself, but for a guest, that was a different matter. So he approached the fire to put the staves inside when the woodsman said, "Wait, I'm no tradesman, but I can see that that wood was not meant to burn. Hold on to your oak, Cooper. I have something for you." The woodsman stood up and went outside. In a moment, he swung the door open and began to throw in log after log of hickory and maple and white oak, log after log, until the two of them piled up the firewood all the way to the ceiling. And the cooper was so filled with gratitude and asked, "How can I pay you for this?" And he said, "No. Keeping a man from freezing is worth a pile of wood at least." And so they sat by the hot fire. They talked all night. They became friends. And one feeling gratitude for the other. In the morning, it was time for the woodsman to leave, time for the cooper to get back to work. And they stood and they held hands. And they thanked each other for such a gift of the wood and the night's rest. And the woodsman left. The cooper got to work. And the woodsman, with an empty sled now, began to walk down back towards the town and paused for a moment, heard a voice. And the voice was soft, light, much like the sound that he heard when he was in the forest. And he heard the voice say, "Thank you." And he looked back at the house, and he could see the tree now was enormous. And he knew it immediately as a white winter oak. But he knew that the tree was rare, but what caught his attention was the way in which the branches had grown over time. Almost like they were reaching out to the house, like a mother about to comfort her child. And the cooper smiled and turned and walked into the town. So what I'd like you all to do in this room with me, and those of you all around the world, just take a moment right now. And if you need to, you can look at this candle and use that light to remind you of something that you're thankful for, that brings you gratitude. And as a community, we can let that gratitude heat up this space and the space that you all are in, because it does that. Gratitude brings that warmth. So let's just take a moment and each of us think of something we're grateful for, someone we're grateful for, some moment that fills our heart with that warmth. That's what I'm grateful for. So here's the part. Let me just see how we are with time. I'm glad you're back. Plenty. Where we get to do some storytelling together. So what we're going to do is open ourselves to all the stories that are here in the room, and you all are going to be opening yourselves to the stories that are in the room in which you're watching this. So you can see us and see me on the screen. They're watching through a streaming video. But you can expand your awareness to see what else is in this room. All of you around the world that are watching this right now can join us. And unfortunately, you won't have the wealth of storytelling that we have. But I'd love for all of us here to listen, smell, feel the floor, the chair, our knees, our clothes, the temperature, the air, and look at the colors. Look at the shapes. Look at all the sources of light. And just notice where your attention goes. Forrest, can I ask you what you noticed? Was it a sound or a color or a shape or an image? Yeah, okay, that's a good one. I like that, all the things and none of the things. It's perfect. Thalia, what are you noticing? No, it's too much. Wyatt, what do you see? Okay. We're noticing that shields, and actually there are a number of them. I don't know if you've looked up, but there are some remarkable things that I hadn't noticed. What are you noticing? Anyone in particular? Yeah, all of them. Is there a theme that you're seeing in these paintings? Everyday life, yeah. I am finding myself drawn to feet. Literally drawn to feet right now. Yeah. Yes. Oh, let's take in the rose for a moment. Look at that. I don't know how close you can get, but there is some magic happening right at the end. At least that's my interpretation. And the light that rose seems to be seeking. Where did your attention go in the room? Did you hear something or see something? Mom, maybe? Yeah, the windows are quite remarkable. And if you can come here when it's light outside, you're in for a treat. What's coming through those windows is quite remarkable. Yes? Yes, yes. My eyes kept going to it as well. Thanks for noticing that. Well, so we already have started to tell a story. We've noticed some shields. We've noticed windows. We've noticed a Christmas tree. We've noticed everything. We've noticed nothing. And we noticed that rose. Yeah. Yeah, that's the one. So I guess our next question, and maybe what we can do is get some suggestions from you all, is what kind of story do we want to tell together? Here are some ideas. We could tell a fairy story, like the one that we just told, that has a fairy in it. We could tell an animal story, and it could be about any animal. We could tell an old-timey story which this one was also a little bit like that, back when we used to make everything in little workshops. Those are fun. We could tell a friendship story. We could tell a family story. Lots of different kinds of families. So what will happen is that people who are out in the world can make little comments, and some of those comments will come through, and when they do, one might catch your attention. You don't have to say all of them, but if you notice something and you think, oh, I would like to report on this one, I would love to hear it. Let's all listen, and before you say anything, notice when Will says what kind of story, how that makes you feel, how that makes your body feel. And if your body says, oh, I want to hear that kind of story, I would love for you to let me know. You can do that by raising your hand. You can do that by getting up and doing a little dance. You can do that by saying, oh, I would like to hear that story. Any kind of reflection will work well for me. So let's all listen.
Actually, I wanted to share that Piper likes the yellow and blue in the room.
Piper likes the yellow and blue in the room.
It feels yellow and bluish in here.
I'm now aware of that, the yellow and blue.
And this says, my girls suggest animals.
Okay, some animals.
There's other ones. Shall I continue?
Yes.
Friendship.
Friendship. Okay.
An old-timey story, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation
Old-timey
point.
with 3 exclamation points, everyone. Okay, that's getting a response.
Animal stories and fairies.
Okay, all the things.
A
Nice.
vote for a fairy story. Animals, please, is another one.
Yeah.
Georgia requests Martin and Sylvia.
Yes. George and
And-
Forrest. Yeah.
And fakeries?
Fakeries. This is a curious word. Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Haha fairies.
Ha-ha fairies. Yes. Laughing fairies. All right. Am I right in noticing that Old World seemed to, especially on this side, seemed to get some excitement? I have to be honest that the moment the word fakery was used, that caught my attention, and I'm finding myself very attracted to that. I don't know what that is, but maybe we can find out. So I think maybe we'll do an Old World story that has something to do with fakeries. And there might be some animals in this story. And if there are animals in this story, would anyone in the room or out there have an idea of a kind of animal? Yes, Forrest. Yeah. Zebra. Excellent. Furry animal. Yeah, nice. I like furry animals too. Excellent. All right. A tiger. All right, we have some stripes that are happening. Yeah. And if we make those stripes furry, I think we're rock solid. Anything out in the world coming through? Animal-wise?
Fox,
Yeah.
dragon,
Great.
Stellar's jay,
Oh yeah, I love those.
dogs and cats.
Great.
Mabel says jackal.
Yes. Thank you, Mabel.
Cat, a badger.
I have to say, as soon as you said Stellar's J, everything collapsed around that, along with the stripes. That's great. Okay. So now what we're going to do is bring our attention back to the candle, back to a story of light, a story of gratitude, and we're going to make this story together. I'll do probably most of the talking. But from time to time, I may come near you or look at you, and if you want to add something, you can. You don't have to, and I don't want you to feel nervous about that. I tend to only look to people that really genuinely would like to tell some stories, so don't worry about that at all. So to start our story, I'm going to go over to this seasoned storyteller right here, and Who's beginning this story? Who's this story about? Jason. Excellent. And can you describe Jason to me just a little bit, just a few details? How old is Jason?
Jason is 16. He lives in
Okay, that's great. Excellent. Okay. Excellent. Okay. And it's cold there right now, isn't it? Yes. Yeah, up in the mountains of Maine. Jason works hard. Where Jason lives is a hard life. Everyone in the family needs to work just as hard. Everyone in the village works just as hard because it gets quite cold, because it's very hard to grow things in that part of the world. And a 16-year-old is a prized member of the community because Jason was strong, Jason was resilient, Jason could work long hours, but what this community prized most of all was Jason's imagination. So how they knew this was that while Jason worked, it was quite common to hear him mutter to himself. He would work and he would be whispering things, and if you got close enough to him while he was working, while he was piling wood, while he was fishing, while he was helping someone in town carry something here or there, if you got close enough, you would realize that Jason was telling stories. He was a storyteller. He was quite a good storyteller. And his favorite topic was to explore things that he actually didn't know what they were. And he called them fakeries. His fakery stories were very well known in town. And what this was is that he would come up with an image or a word, and he would tell a fakery story about it to explain what that thing was. So there were some people in the village that had done some traveling, not far, but had been able to go into the cities and even as far south as this new city that was called Boston. And in Boston, there were very learned people that were reading books, and some of them had traveled around the world, and they would report on things that they had seen. And some of the things that were reported were these very curious animals, tigers, zebras, Steller's jays, and dragons. He wasn't quite sure what these things were. There were stories. Knew that tigers were a kind of cat, a big cat. Knew that zebras were a kind of horse, a striped horse that was from somewhere far, far away. Knew that Steller's jay was a kind of bird, a big fat bird that made a lot of noise. And he would tell a story about them, muttering it initially to himself, but if he found that some of the younger children that were following him around wanted to hear the full story, he would pause, kneel down, and he would tell them the whole tale. But this notion of a dragon gave him pause. He knew that there was something about it that had to do with a lizard or a snake. But it was a lizard or snake that could fly. And what's more, some of them could breathe fire. That was very interesting to Jason. Were these real? Did such a thing truly exist? Well, this was going to be his fakery of fakeries. And he did a whole series of these stories during a time of the year when the village got smaller, when people got closer together, and it was in late November and December as they were preparing for a long, hard winter. And the way in which this community, this town, did this is they had a special gathering, a place that they would gather. And they would light a fire, and they would prepare. They'd prepare by talking about what they had that they could share. They'd prepare by talking about things that they needed to anticipate. They knew it was going to be a particularly snowy winter. Well, they needed to prepare for that. And then they would give each other strength and hope and energy by telling stories. This was something that the community often did. Now we have another member of the community. This member of the community had a very particular task, a very sacred role in the community. And do you happen to know what that task was? What role that was? Yeah, I was thinking maybe it was a painter too. Yeah. Yeah, they understood how important this was. As important as stories are, the thing about the painter, and the painter worked all day, every day, it was how they knew what had happened up until this point. This was not a community that wrote things down. They told stories, they repeated stories, but they could actually see them on the walls in the painter's studio. Each image was of someone that once lived in the town or was still in the town, but it documented generations and generations. And that studio became almost like a church. People would visit, and they'd go over to an image, and the young ones would say, "What's this?" And sometimes the painter, but sometimes one of the other adults that happened to be there would say, "Whoa, that was the flood of 25 years ago, where the pond out there reached all the way into town." And people thought, as they came through, that it was actually a lake, but the floods were so wide and so deep that they stayed, and in the winter it froze, and our entire landscape was ice. And the children would listen rapt. So in a sense, this community was lucky in that they had all these storytellers and then a painter that was able to document and put them in a space where people could come. Well, the community had just suffered some challenges that year. It was a bad year in terms of weather, and it was a bad year in terms of the limited crops that they had. From time to time, it happens every year, a particular bug will suddenly have a huge appetite and will eat the things that people don't want the bug to eat. Or a worm will make its way into something that has already grown, or a beetle will begin to nip at trees and the trees will suffer. This is the way of the world. Well, it was 3 or 4 things that happened in the community this year. And so the crops were very low. And it wasn't like they could go to some other place and get food back in those days. No, what they grew was what they had. There were hunters, there was game, but that would not do. So, they gathered together, and they were going to talk about this in anticipation of the long winter. How were they going to handle this? It went round. People talked about, I've stored enough hickory nuts that I think that they will be a good source of strength for us, and other people saying how they had room in their home. We could consolidate and people could live together and stay warm. And when it came to Jason, he stood up and said, "We need a dragon." And everyone looked at Jason and was very curious what this meant. We need a dragon because dragons are able to go anywhere in the world, get us whatever we want, bring it back here, and if it needs cooking, they provide their own fire. And he began to tell story after story about dragons that people began to feel hope. Yes, they thought, we need a dragon. And so they looked to Jason and said, where are these dragons from? Where can we find one? Where can we get them? And to that, suddenly he didn't have an answer. He waited for the story to come. The stories always came. But in this instance, there was nothing there until he looked up into the eyes of the painter and could tell that she had an idea. And he said, she knows. And all eyes went to the painter, who looked very surprised in that instance, but actually in that moment remembered a dream. And as she remembered the dream, people got a little bit closer to her and got very still and very quiet because they knew they were about to learn something very special. And she said, we have one. Come with me. And everyone got on their skins and got on their warm things and followed the painter outside as the snow began to fall. They went outside. And I wonder where they walked next. So we're all going to be quiet for a moment as we imagine what it looks like outside of that house where they gathered and heard the stories. And they're all outside. And an idea of where they came or where they went to is going to come from people around the world as they have ideas. And Will, when something catches your attention, let us know. And if something catches any of your attention, let me know. Where could they have gone? Where would the painter have led them?
Volcano.
Yeah. So there was a mountain, a particularly special mountain that was in the range north of town. So the hills that they lived in were still close enough to the water that they could get what they needed in the valley, and they could also be close to the mountains in order to hunt and in order to enjoy the mountains. But the tallest mountains were a little bit further to the north. And there was one, when the sun hit it in just the right way, it glowed red, and it was called the volcano. Now, Jason had never been to the volcano, nor had many of the people in town, but a few had, and one of them was the painter. And the painter said, I have a path that I use. It's not an easy trek. We will need to spend the night, but come with me. Not everybody went. In fact, most stayed behind, but Jason went and followed along. And in the middle of the night, they followed a long path that went over one peak, around a big rocky cavern, and then they eventually made their way at dawn to the base of this extraordinarily beautiful, beautiful mountain. And it was at that point that the sun was just coming up and was shimmering in such a way that it glowed red. And people were in awe of what they saw. And the painter said, there are some wonderful places that we can go and enjoy the view, but something tells me that if we go up here, I wonder if we'll be able to see Jason's dragon. Now, this is something that painters can do. They can tap into other people's imagination. And Jason and the painter, they were connected, and they were seeing the same creatures, the same beings, the same potential, the same magic, and the same sense of possibility, that whatever it was that they were seeking, they would find, and it would bring them safety, food, warmth. And everyone else could feel that. And so they followed Jason and the painter up the pathway. They were tired. Along the edge, they were hungry. Around, as the trees began to get smaller, they were cold. Until they stopped and listened to singing. Who was singing? They looked around, they didn't see anyone. But then they came around the next edge, and there was a band of people. And they were playing instruments, and they were singing, and they were so happy. And everything glowed, this beautiful rosy glow, as the happy few joined in and inquired, "Who are you? Why are you here? What is this?" And this group of people, they were players. They were theater people. And they called themselves the Rose. And everywhere they went, their goal was to bring light and joy and possibility and happiness. They had songs that they sang, plays that they liked to act out, stories that they told, and they had heard that there was a village nearby, and they wanted to visit. And so everyone came back into the town. They made their way there. It was now mid-morning, and the people were wondering, "Did you find the dragon?" And everyone that had discovered this band of players called the Rose said, "Yes. All that you want from the dragon, we now have." And they didn't see the food. They didn't see firewood. They didn't see riches. They didn't see anything that seemed to be what they thought they were looking for. But the members of the Rose began to sing, and they began to dance. And the people of that town began to sing and dance as well. They felt the warmth, and they felt their bellies fill. They would be okay. They would find the food that they needed. They would work together to make sure that everyone was healthy. They would make it through this winter. Of that they were sure. And this ultimately was the gift of the Rose that from that point forward was called the Rose Dragon. And it became Jason's favorite story to tell. That was our story. We did it. Wow. Well, everyone, that was a delicious time together. I think we're probably pretty close. Yeah. We're exactly on time. That story finished right on time. Well, we'll do this again next week. Next week, we're going to explore stillness, and strangely enough, we're going to explore stillness by walking around. So there'll be a story, but there'll also be a point in which we might be able to go outside for a moment. And we will continue to have light. And the week after that, there might be a little bit of music and storytelling that goes with the music. So please come back. Please come back and tell others, and we can continue to weave stories all together. So thank you all. This was a pretty magical time.
Thank you.
You have to come every week. I'm going to give you more parts next time. Yeah. Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, truly. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, great. The actually tonight, in terms of the tickets that were purchased, was the smallest one. I guess maybe a lot of people busy. So we can look forward to maybe some other folks. But oh, Meredith is going to flip out. I can't wait. I'm so glad you're coming. And it's really nice to meet you. Yeah. Really nice to meet you. Yeah. Yeah. I hope that's okay. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you, Forrest. Thank you for that. You helped so much. I hope you can come again, but that's a long ways, so maybe this was the one.
He's like, we want to come. I have
Okay.
a 13-year-old that was jealous that he wasn't coming tonight,
Oh,
so he might be back.
maybe with the 13-year-old, yeah. Yeah, that would be great.
Wonderful to meet you. Thank
It's
you.
really great to meet the two of you.
Thanks for your patience with the coughing. I hope it wasn't too disruptive.
No, and you can cough through the whole story. I don't, it's not a problem for me. I cough all the time, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Take care.
Till next time.
Okay.
Thanks for that. Now I'm remembering the windows. Windows didn't make it in, but yeah, yeah,
Some
Yeah.
other time.
yeah. You should come and see. Are you connected to the church? Or? Okay, well, that's a good difference.
I'm
Yeah,
familiar with stained glass in general.
yeah. They're amazing. And actually, the main place
Yeah.
it's